Right, boys and girls, staff, ladies and gentlemen, anyone who identifies any differently from any of those things, everyone's welcome here. Well, most people are anyway. Thanks for joining me once again. We're dealing with people who want to be wrong on the interwebs. It's recidivist offenders as usual. It's Gil Carvalho again, and he's talking to one of my countrymen, who is a bloke called Brad Stanfield, who we're about to see, unfortunately, is completely and utterly out of his depth and has no idea what he's talking about whatsoever, and is about to lead people up the garden path with a bunch of dangerous, contraindicated misinformation, born of his arrogance and his ignorance of what he is actually talking about. So we'll deal with that in a point-wise fashion in our normal style, shall we? What fun. Stick around. This one should be good. I haven't watched this through from start to finish as a caveat. I'm just responding pretty much off the cuff. So any references to literature that may or may not come up, I'll add those in later in editing in post. So I'll just mention them, the ones that are in my brain at the time, and we'll put them up. But, the usual thing. Right. Gil and Brad, tell us all about saturated fat and its controversies online. Off you go.
Making these videos about science for a general audience, for a non-specialized audience, week after week, forces me to think about two things.
Neither of which are common sense or actual scientific methodology, Gil. And why is it that every time I do a freeze frame on Gil, we get a similar sort of view? A similar sort of thing happens. I don't do this on purpose. I really don't. Maybe it's just that he spends so much time holding himself in a certain way. I don't know. Anyway, do tell us more.
Science on one hand, obviously, but also how to communicate it effectively.
Well, you would start, Gil, by communicating accurately and truthfully about what science can and cannot inform us on, and you would stop misrepresenting science in the way that you do every single time you publish a video, Gil. Every time, without fail, you totally misrepresent the facts of the issue that you're talking about. You lie about what science can and cannot inform us on. It's ridiculous. It's contraindicated. It's criminal misanthropy. Okay?
Because it's like a marriage, right? Either one without the other doesn't exist. So recently I was chatting about this with Brad Stanfield. He's a doctor from New Zealand. He also has a YouTube channel. So our experiences overlap a lot. And
not really as a doctor, Gil, because in my understanding, you've actually not done a lot, if any, at all, practicing medicine, or indeed undertaking actual cutting-edge research either. As a scientist, you kind of run the gambit between the two, but actually haven't really been involved on any real meaningful level in either one of those things.
The topic of saturated fat came up in this context of scientific communication.
With scientific communication, tell us all about science, Gil. Well, Brad's about to have an attempt at telling us all about science. Well, we'll get to it in a minute.
Take a look.
I think that the things that, at least in the clinical space, that isn't controversial but online possibly is, let's talk about saturated fat. So,
yes, the controversy is an opinion. It's an interpretation of the state of communication and information in a given area. Now, you may feel like you've got this pinned down, Brad Stanfield, but I can promise anyone who knows anything about science will tell you otherwise, because you're about to say something that is just so immensely destitute of competence as a scientific statement that it's laughable, son. And myself and all my people are going to laugh at you uproariously when you say it. I won't actually necessarily force it, because I've seen this bit of the video and I've already laughed myself nearly to death watching it the first time, and for fear that my sides shall split, I will refrain from laughing again, but I'll just pause there and give people enough time to get their laughter out when they hear it too. We'll get to it in a minute, though.
So there's been a lot of research and a lot of, I think, misinformation online about saturated fat.
That's true. There has been a lot of misinformation online and elsewhere about saturated fat. What there has not been is a lot of research on the cause and effect relationships between the consumption of saturated fat and any hard health outcome in human beings over any reasonable period of time, conducted with anything like scientific discipline, control, or reasonable levels of observation, Brad. Okay.
When a meta-analysis was done by Cochrane.
No, it wasn't done by Cochrane. Cochrane is the organisation that published it according to their rules of meta-analyses that they were conducted by. The people that did the meta-analysis were Hooper and others. Okay.
It showed that reducing saturated fat intake can reduce heart disease by about 17%.
Pausing now for your laughter. Here we have a bloke claiming to be scientifically competent, making a cause and effect statement on the basis of a poorly designed, poorly executed, ill-disciplined naturalistic observation with no ability whatsoever to inform on cause or effect in any way, shape, or form on any aspect of anything. Such results also having been fabricated by means of adjustment from what was actually observed, and also without any reference whatsoever to the fact that the outcome statistic he has just provided is a relative outcome statistic with a squeak, literally a gnat's nuts, over the statistical significance benchmark, but nowhere near a clinical benchmark for significance clinically in any one given living human being, and not over a 100-year lifespan. Not to mention the fact that the study was not representative of the population at large. It was a specific subpopulation, which anyone can see if they actually go and look at the paper, Brad. You are a ridiculous child academically who is completely out of your lane here and completely out of your depth. Your statement is beyond laughable. It is ridiculous. You've just made cause and effect statement on the basis of epidemiology. You are done here, Brad. You're finished. Your time in the limelight should now be over. I am embarrassed to share a country of origin with you. Disgraceful.
And so on the basis of that, that's strong evidence to reduce the saturated fat intake.
You may laugh again now, boys and girls, because that statement is equally vapid, destitute of competence and understanding of anything whatsoever, and ridiculous in the extreme. It is not strong evidence of anything whatsoever, let alone strong evidence that you should moderate your behavior in any fashion. Absolutely, fundamentally ridiculous from the ground up.
And I think that's, one of the reasons why in the clinical guidelines we want to reduce saturated fat.
No, we don't. We don't want to do anything of the sort. That is a mistake.
But when I sometimes mention that on the channel, people say, no, you want to be increasing saturated fat.
They're probably my supporters, Brad, that are getting across there to speak to you in a sensible way about the fact that you are so vastly, utterly misguided on this topic, and so utterly, vastly, grossly without the first semblance of competence in this area. You are a physician, son. You are not a nutritionist. You are not a physiologist. You are not a scientist. Go and be a physician, which qualifies you in no way whatever to speak to anybody about nutrition. Neither are you a pathophysiologist, by the way. Okay? Clearly and obviously, because if you were, you wouldn't be talking in the way that you are, in this childlike fashion, academically. You are making yourself a laughing stock here, son. Please stop it.
And I think it would be quite useful to spend a bit of time on this. So yeah.
Okay. Let's spend some time on this. Refute anything I've had to say thus far, Brad. We'll wait with bated breath, won't we, boys and girls? Let's see what Brad has to say on this. Once we've gathered ourselves up off the floor from having just about laughed ourselves to death already.
What's your experience around discussing saturated fat?
Similar. I'll go over the evidence, the observational evidence.
No, you don't, though, Gil. You misrepresent the science at every single turn. Your competence to critically analyze peer-reviewed publications is absolutely in the gutter, son. It is appalling. I have done, I don't know how many debunking videos on your destitution of understanding of scientific literature. And anyone that wants to find those videos will find them on another platform, perhaps if they take an odyssey of discovery. Such an odyssey will lead people to where they might find those videos so that they can all have a laugh at Gil Carvalho's expense. Just ridiculous.
And the bulk of the interventional evidence. And
there is no interventional evidence, Gil, for long-term health outcomes in human beings conducted under discipline, control, etc., etc. This work does not exist. You implying that it does is a misrepresentation of fact. Another word for that is it's a lie, Gil. It's propaganda and it's spin doctrine, and it's basically designed around attempting desperately to justify your ridiculous adherence to the Church of Anorexia Vegana, Gil. There's no excuse for this behavior. It's disgraceful. It's contraindicated. It's misanthropic. And you ought to be locked up. What's next?
I'll even explain some observations that may seem contradictory, but they are explainable with contrast of exposure, with the comparator, so the replacement. If you don't look at the replacement, some of these epidemiological studies just look at changes in saturated fat, but they don't look at what the person is eating instead.
Why focus on that, Gil? Why not mention the fact that they don't control any of the innumerable milieu of completely uncontrolled confounders, God, I can't even speak, confounders, covariates, and other factors that totally invalidate any epidemiological study in nutrition with its ability to inform in any way, shape, or means on cause and effect. They can't at all. They are not an appropriate tool to get at cause and effect. They have their place in guiding researchers as to where experimental studies should go, were they possible, which they're not largely in human nutrition. But you cannot inform on cause and effect with an epidemiological study standalone. Not possible. Cannot be done. Should not be done. Anyone attempting to do that is behaving in an incredibly disingenuous and irresponsible fashion. It's incompetent in the extreme if you don't know any better. If you do know better, then it's actually criminal misanthropy. I don't really care which it is, Gil. Either is a reason for you to stop making videos because you are utterly without the first clue on this. What's next?
And if you're just looking at a general Western population, like in the US, for example, the tendency is to replace saturated fat with refined carbohydrates.
Okay, show me an epidemiological study even that looks at a general population at all. They don't. They are all recruited to with already aged people at the outset who have already lived 50, 55, and 60 years usually before they even start following these people. Why is that? Well, because you need enough death to occur in a population in a short enough period of time that within 10, 20 years you can publish your study and have anything to talk about whatsoever. Okay, so these do not represent the general public, whose mean age is a great deal lower than the average mean age of people who are recruited to these kind of studies, Gil. So even if it was a cause and effect relationship between input and output in terms of saturated fat and longevity, for example, which it isn't, let's just say it was, just for fun, you cannot extrapolate the findings in a group of people aged usually 60 and above with the general population in that regard. We're done. And yet you're still doing that. And you're even saying, when we look at a generalized population, well, show me a study that does. There isn't one. You're a liar. What's next?
Great. So you tend to not see a big difference there. That doesn't mean that there isn't an effect of the...
Hang on. Looking for an effect and not finding an effect doesn't indicate that there's not a strong effect. That's some good logicking there, Gil. How do you explain that? Yes, it does mean that. If there were a strong, meaningful, and powerful effect, and we look for it, we would find it. We don't. Ergo, oh God, really, honestly, it's like trying to herd cats talking to these vagoonerized buffheads, isn't it? It's incredible the shit they will say to try and justify their ideology. They will say things that are 180 degrees out of phase with objective reality, with a straight face, without blinking, and expect that someone who actually has some common sense, some ability to interpret things and to think about things won't trip you up on this? My word, this is incredible.
Saturated fat, but if you're replacing it with something that's equally problematic, yeah, you're not going to see much of a benefit. So I've made multiple videos explaining those trying to explain those factors. I think it's a very polarizing issue, and people are exposed to a lot of messages online that tend to be extreme. And one end, some dietary camps tend to people hear essentially that saturated fat is just poison, no matter the amount, no matter the context, and if you have any saturated fat in your diet, you're killing yourself. And in other dietary camps, people hear the opposite, that it's completely innocuous and good for you, just pile it up.
Like anything, too much of anything can be problematic. Too much water can be problematic. Too much protein can be problematic. Too much carbohydrate absolutely is problematic. There are two ways about it. But we have a 4.5 million year history, at least, of getting the vast majority of our energetic intakes in the form of largely saturated animal fats. We are absolutely genetically molded by natural selection pressures over a vast, vast tract of geological time to be a species that does well on that. That is our niche. We are a specialist animal, just like all other animals are a specialist. Okay? There is absolutely no evidence extant anywhere in the peer-reviewed literature that can scientifically, empirically establish cause and effect, or even strongly infer that the consumption of saturated fat is a problem in human beings with regard to their health outcomes over any period of time, long or short. Those are the facts. Any statement other than the one I have just made is a bastardization of the truth. The truth is no evidence exists to support a claim of cause and effect deleterious outcomes on health from saturated fat. None at all. Not one data point. Zero.
It doesn't matter. And if you go through the evidence systematically,
I have done very carefully over about 26 years now, Gil. It's my absolute wheelhouse. I know what is in the literature. I've read it, all of it. I've looked at it carefully. I'm also, one of the things I specialize in, Gil, if you didn't know, was pure and applied statistical inference and statistical methodology. Okay, so I do know what the tricks are that are being pulled here or attempted to be pulled. It's not going to wash with me, son.
Immediately see that neither of those make sense.
No, we don't see anything of the sort. See, now you're making up shit to suit your ideology. Now you're espousing an opinion. The facts remain. No evidence exists to support any claim of deleterious outcome, cause and effect, or even associatively between the consumption of saturated fat in human beings and their health outcomes over any period of time. Period. That is the end of the discussion on this topic.
Saturated fat is in vegetables, is in kale, is in lettuce. It's just very small amounts. So saturated fat itself is not a problem. It's the proportions.
No, not at all. The absolute amount of saturated fat might be problematic if the effective energy that a person is actually deriving from that vastly exceeds the amount of energy they are effectively expending on a day-by-day basis, in which case problems will ensue. If 100% of their intakes are saturated fat, there'll be problems because you need protein as well. But so long as you meet your daily protein minimum requirements, in effect, and you don't vastly overconsume energy, in effect, then there's no upper limit to saturated fat consumption in terms of health outcomes. There is no evidence that would lead anyone that is remotely scientifically minded to draw any other conclusion on that. Those are the facts.
And the type of saturated fat and the sources and what you're comparing it to. So, yeah, I think it's normal that there's a lot of emotion and a lot of visceral reactions to this. Because people, understandably, nutrition is a very emotional topic for people. So, but I think that's the value. When I make a video and I get reactions that are very emotional, I don't mind that. In a way, it tells me that I'm talking about something that's worth talking about. Because if 100% of
yeah, but a lot of the emotional reactions you get, Gil, are from people like myself, who are extremely annoyed that you are misleading people with your dangerous contraindicated disinformation about diet, telling people that eating a vegan diet is a good idea and is healthy and will reduce their risk of anything whatsoever without the first scrap of evidence to support any of your claims at all. Putting the great god of epidemiology up as if that's some kind of science. It's nothing of the sort. It's an ill-disciplined, completely uncontrolled naturalistic observation, which the results are usually lied about because they're adjusted. That's fabrication, Gil. That's not science. Okay? Show me some experiments on human beings locked in labs for multiple decades if you want to talk about people's health outcome prospects as that relates to any aspect of human nutrition. Those kind of studies don't exist, and they never will. Okay, so stop telling people that human nutrition science exists. It doesn't. It's an area of ring-fenced ideology underpinned by theology and the almighty greenback dollar. Actually, it's not science. What's next?
the viewers agree with me, I have added no value. If I make a video about how tobacco is bad, I'm going to get no complaints, but they've learned nothing. They've gotten no value out of me. So I don't mind. Most of my videos are on topics that are considered controversial. It's saturated fat, it's cholesterol, it's, Yeah,
and you're wrong about that too. You're wrong about saturated fat, and you're wrong about cholesterol, and you're wrong about a vegan diet being remotely indicated sensible or health promoting. You're wrong about your competence to analyze peer-reviewed literature in a remotely competent fashion. You're just wrong, Gil. Wrong, and your misanthropic disinformation is evil. You need to stop.
statins, it's all these things.
Yeah, and you got that one wrong too. completely wrong.
And we always get complaints. We always get complaints from like both ends of the spectrum. And I don't mind. I think it's normal if you're talking about something that is an emotional topic and where there's a lot of messages online that aren't necessarily the most substantial science-wise.
Yeah, but Gil, you're not qualified to speak on what's substantial science-wise. You have no idea what you're talking about. You are incompetent scientifically. The fact that you hold a couple of degrees, one of which is a research-based degree, actually in neurophysiology, by the way, Gil, and not nutrition, just quietly, doesn't make you competent. Competence is demonstrable by what comes out of your mouth. And you are sitting there promoting a vegan diet to people. We're done here, Gil. You're finished. Your credibility from that point forward is zero. None. You're a buffoon. You're an ignoramus. I'm sorry. Those are the facts. What's next?
It's expected that people are going to be chafed by some of these messages. But to me, that tells me that it is worth talking about it and showing the science.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you don't know what science is, Gil. I've covered this. Right, Brad.
completely agree with that. And I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I try and emphasize on my channel is that my opinion really doesn't matter.
Well, that's the first thing I've heard you say, actually, Brad, that is correct and indicated and sensible from you. In which case, what you should do is keep it to yourself, son, because you're completely out of your lane here and completely out of your depth. You're completely incompetent to speak about human nutrition, human physiology, the pathophysiology of cardiac disease, clearly, because you think saturated fat is something we need to avoid. We're done. But we're only halfway through this, goodness me.
It matters what the evidence shows.
Great. Well, show us some evidence, Brad. Show us some evidence.
So, and I try and explain how to analyze studies. And
Studies are not evidence. They're not the same thing, Brad. Evidence, scientifically, for cause and effect, is litigated empirically and experimentally under a certain set of disciplines which involve proper delimitation of your subject pool, proper randomization of your subcohorts such that they are homogeneous in every other respect that could conceivably affect your outcome, that they are observed by the researcher, that they are in a controlled situation such as a locked metabolic ward in the case of a nutrition study, that they are controlled adequately, i.e. all the confounders that could meaningfully affect your outcome are controlled in the first instance prior to data collection, that the study is tenured appropriately to the outcome that you want to extrapolate to. So if you want to talk about multiple decadal health outcomes in humans, that's how long you've got to keep them under lock and key in observation, discipline, and control. Forget about it, son. That's not evidence. If you're not doing those things, it's not evidence. It's a loosely, poorly controlled, naturalistic observation that cannot in any way inform us on cause and effect. It might have a utility to do such studies if such studies found remarkable, clear, and unmistakable associations. Do they? No, they don't. Look at smoking and lung cancer, and you get huge, vast increases in incidence associated with smoking behavior, unmistakable, clear associations. That has a value. Look at epidemiological studies and you find no such thing, whatever. It's nonsense, Brad, and you've been sucked in because actually this is not your wheelhouse. This is not your area of expertise. This is not a subject that you have studied. Statistical inference, research, design, human physiology, human nutrition needs. You're an allopathic physician, and that's what you should stick to. That is your area. Go and do that.
And how to put them on the evidence pyramid.
The evidence pyramid. See, there's just another indication that you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. There is no valid, it's actually called a hierarchy of evidence, by the way, Brad. It's not even called a pyramid. It's called a hierarchy of evidence, and it's not underpinned by any evidence. What objective empirical measurement of the goodness of evidence is communicated by the hierarchy? If it says meta-analyses of randomized crossover control trials double-blind are at the top of the pyramid, and randomized double-blind crossover trials are below that, by how much are they below that? What is the metric that tells us how much better a meta-analysis is than a single randomized crossover trial? What measurement was taken by whom objectively to make that assessment? Well, there isn't one. It's an opinion, isn't it, Brad? Have a look at where opinions sit on your hierarchy of evidence, Brad. You might find that informative. For those that haven't seen it, spoiler, it's right down the bottom. It basically says that this is not a good form of evidence. So the hierarchy, by its very own dictates, undercuts itself, erodes its own value to none. Ergo, I think we're done with the hierarchy and how to place things on it. What you have in science, it being a dichotomous decision node, positivistic endeavor, you have ones or zeros, Brad. You accept a hypothesis or you reject it. The context of any given paper is in its acceptance or rejection of a hypothesis, and the critical analysis by the competent reader is whether or not that paper actually is capable of informing on the hypothesis as proposed at the beginning of the paper. Most of them fall flat on their face in that respect, Brad, and are actually unable to do so, and that includes every single epidemiological paper that purports to be able to inform us on cause and effect in any way at all. A competent scientist and empiricist knows that.
Because there's, if you come up with some observational data that's of, 20 people, that's entirely different compared to actually an interventional study where they're genuinely making a change and comparing that change to the standard. So,
okay, so that takes all of those things I was talking about before in terms of design, control, observation, metabolic ward lock-in status, etc. Do you have any of those studies, Brad, on human nutrition? No? Neither does anybody else. They don't exist, son. What's next?
I completely agree that if we are making videos about controversial topics, I think at the end of the day, they probably shouldn't be that controversial, but because of all of the misinformation online, they
perpetuated by people like you, Brad, and your little friend Gil here, by being basically so very unbelievably, stunningly arrogant as to speak authoritatively about a subject about which you have no idea and no training whatsoever. Clearly. The Dunning-Kruger drips from every pore, Brad. I'm embarrassed for you and for the nation at large.
Have become controversial. But you are going to come up with people that really don't like that content, and as you say, that's important because then you're exposing those people to the evidence, and then they can.
What evidence is that, Brad? Have you got any? We're still waiting for any evidence. Still no? Okay, that's what I thought.
Make up their own decision about what they want to do, because at the end of the day, I think both of us, all we're trying to do is just show the evidence. So that
great. Well, show us some evidence, Brad. How much evidence have you supplied in this video, son? How much evidence exists in the field of saturated fat? Remember, this video is about saturated fat, by the way, boys and girls. Remember that? How much evidence about saturated fat has Brad supplied?
People can make up their own mind as to what they want to do.
If they can make up their own mind, Brad, why do you need to tell them anything? And if you were going to tell them something, why not tell them something that is accurate, correct, and has veracity, such as what I do on my fine, actually science-based channel, from a standpoint, ultimately, of complete competence and mastery of the subject matter. Sub to my channel, Brad. You'll learn a lot.
And if people are more informed, that's at the end of the day.
Are they going to be informed by you, Brad, or are they going to be misinformed by you?
Then we've succeeded in our mission.
Exactly. My favorite topics, when I know that I have a feeling that a video is going to be productive in terms of, pushing buttons, but in a good way. Like here's evidence that you haven't seen before. My point.
Show us some evidence then, Gil. Because your epididdly doodly moodly mology isn't it. That's not evidence of anything. We need to see properly designed, properly controlled, properly disciplined experiments with human beings as subjects over multiple decades locked in labs. It still doesn't exist. Sorry about that. So what you need to do is to be responsible and to be truthful with people and say the evidence is not there. It does not exist and it never will. What we have here is an ideology. You certainly have an ideology. You have a theological devotion to an ideology. What you don't have is a scrap of evidence to support your ideology. None at all.
My goal with the videos is exactly to give access to the evidence to a population.
Again, good. Access to the evidence, you say. Well, where is it, Gil? Where is the evidence to underpin your theology?
That doesn't necessarily have access to it, precisely in areas where the scientific evidence contrasts with what people are being told on the internet.
Well, where is that? Because to contrast with evidence, evidence has to exist, Gil.
And so this type of thing where there is virtually no controversy in the scientific community, and this...
My God. If anybody wanted a single statement from Gil Carvalho that absolutely points unequivocally and unabashedly to his total incompetence to speak on science, there it is right there. Science is litigated empirically. Controversy is an opinion. It's an assessment of the state of communication and information or misinformation in a given area. Science, by its very nature, by its very design, by its very disciplines, absolutely is a controversial undertaking. It generates controversy. It generates further hypotheses. How do you do science? By questioning the science. Is there any equivocality in the actually genuinely scientifically underpinned areas of communication between human beings regarding saturated fat and health? Yes, Gil, there is controversy there. Because there are buffoons like you who are saying the science is settled, science is finished, saturated fat's bad. Look at my epidemiology, it says so, even though it doesn't. Goodness me, you look at the epidemiology on saturated fat, Gil, 5 major meta-analyses exist on this topic that have been done in the last 10 years. 5, of which 1 has been referenced here by Brad. The meta-analysis by Hooper and not by Cochrane, that one. All 5 of those studies agree in that not one of them was able to show a meaningful, utilitarian or clinically impactful difference in health outcomes of any kind for human beings whatsoever. The Hooper study is the only one that even found a statistically significant result, and that's only by a gnat's nuts. Like the upper bound of the confidence, of the 95% confidence around the differential statistic was like 0.99 something. The other 4 major meta-analyses did not even find statistical significance. And actually, Gil, if you look at the Hooper study for evidence of what's called p-hacking, you'll find it, which again takes a competent empiricist, someone who knows about statistical inference and skullduggery and such that goes on in the area to be able to point to this stuff. It would be great for you to show up to debate me on this topic one day, Gil, so that I can point once again to your destitution of competence in this area. You are out of your depth, buddy. You need to pull your head in. You need to get your ego under control. Your arrogance is stunning. People level the same thing at me. They say, you're arrogant. Let me be clear about arrogance. Arrogance is defined absolutely, necessarily, by the caveat that the person exhibiting said arrogance must be confident in their abilities, knowledge, skills, or whatever, to a level that is not indicated by their actual competence, knowledge, skills, etc. It has to be inappropriate confidence, I should say. My confidence is not inappropriate, Gil. Yours is. You are arrogant. I am not. Okay? What's next?
This is an unpopular thing to say on the internet, but you look at the evidence, you look at...
Yes, what evidence is that, Gil? Again, what evidence?
Guidelines across different countries.
Guidelines are not evidence. They are an opinion statement. Where do opinions sit on your treasured hierarchy, Gil, again? Oh, yes. At the bottom.
I don't know what the New Zealand dietary guidelines are, but
I do. And they're junk. They're based on most of the Western guidelines. They're not underpinned by science. They're underpinned by financial interest, bastardization of science, hijacking of science, misanthropy. It's nonsense.
But I'm pretty sure that I can guess that it would be, on the fundamentals, it would be identical.
That's because the same things underpin what happens here in New Zealand to what happens in Canada Shire or America Shire or England Shire. And in fact, there's collusion between all of those organisations and the governments that back them in the westernised nations and elsewhere, actually. What is your point here? Guidelines are not evidence. They are someone's opinion statement. Evidence is empirical, scientific, interventional studies, Gil. Remember? Do you have any of those? Still no? Okay.
To the US, to Italy, to Germany, to Japan, on the fundamentals, right? With cultural differences, with some details differences, but the fundamentals would overlap overwhelmingly.
So, we've covered that.
And that tells us that there's overwhelming consensus in the...
Consensus fallacy. Appeal to consensus fallacy. Because you actually don't have any evidence at all to support your claim that saturated fat is in any way problematic at any level in terms of as a percentage makeup of the effective energy derived from food. You post one study which shows a statistically significant difference that's p-hacked at 0.99 as an upper 95% bound that talks about an absolute differential statistic which is so close to zero as makes no odds to any given living human being over a 100-year lifespan, as if that's some kind of evidence. And then you spend the rest of your video, which is 12 minutes long, talking about all this evidence and supplying no evidence, Gil. None at all. So far, the evidence supplied by you or Brad in this video is none whatsoever for anything. Zero. Still waiting.
The scientific community, but then you see on the internet a completely different picture. And this is, people are exposed almost entirely to this content, this lay content on the internet. So
lay content is content put together by people who are not specialists in the field that they're making content about. Like, you and nutrition science, Gil, because that's not your area at all. You're a physician, which it seems like has never actually practiced as such, not one day, I don't think. And you're a neuroscience graduate with a PhD with, it looks like, no publication record or actual engagement with that field either to speak of, and instead you're making videos about nutrition, a subject about which you know nothing. Your videos are lay content, Gil. They're also crap. They're also disgracefully misanthropic, excremental, pustulous garbage. But that's for another day.
That's my favorite. My favorite topics to touch on is when there's this massive contrast between what scientists see and.
No, there are no nutrition scientists. Gil, human nutrition science does not exist. We've covered that. Science is experimental. Who's experimenting on human beings, and how are they getting the ethics to do that, Gil? Please let me know which organizations are granting people ethics applications to do experiments on human beings. I've got one or two I wouldn't mind doing.
And what the public sees. And so I already expect there to be some reactions, but I'm okay with that. It comes with the territory. We shouldn't assume that because there is consensus is kind of a sanity check.
Hang on a minute. Now consensus is suddenly bad when you've just finished telling us how it is that all the guidelines are based on consensus.
It is relevant to see that there's overwhelming agreement in specialists across the globe.
No, there isn't, Gil. Wrong. And even if there was, so what? At one point, there was overwhelming agreement in the specialists around the world that the Earth was flat, that the sun revolved around the Earth, and we were the center of the universe. In fact, they tied some people to trees and set them on fire for saying otherwise.
It's certainly relevant.
They thought themselves to be pretty modern at the time because they were right up to date at that time. As are we at this time. Unfortunately, however, what we've done is forgotten entirely about the disciplines of science, and instead we've bought into ideology, fear-mongering, spin doctrine, propaganda, theology, and nonsense from complete wombles like Gil Carvalho and his mate Brad here. Okay?
I wouldn't tell people to assume that the consensus is correct, nor would I tell them to assume that what somebody is saying online is wrong. You just have to be very cautious. You have to be very skeptical and really fact check and really, do your homework with information that you're getting kind of from a random source. The danger, I feel the danger is when people see something random online and just jump head first. If the person seems very credible, if the person seems charming.
Well, they won't get that from your channel. They won't get charm and they won't get credibility. They will see what a complete cock monkey you are.
Or if the person is just rapidly going through information that the viewer isn't familiar with, so it's impressive. They go, whoa, this person knows a lot. Scientists and doctors, we make a lot of mistakes. We have areas of ignorance. We're not perfect either. Challenging a doctor is a good thing. Asking questions is a good thing. Going home and reading up and making sure that...
Perhaps one day, Gil, if you ever practice as a doctor, you might find out how good it is to be challenged as a doctor. But in the meantime, you just keep calling yourself Dr. Son. Carry on.
What you heard.
It's just like Michael Greger, this guy. I might be wrong, but I've tried to find any record of Gil Carvalho ever having practiced medicine at all. If someone can find it, please let me know, and I'll correct my statement. I'll apologize unreservedly.
Aligns with the evidence. This is good. I try to encourage my viewers to always do that to my videos. Like, don't just trust me. Go through the evidence. Go listen.
I don't trust you, Gil. I trust absolutely that everything that comes out of your mouth will be misguided and will be wrong. What do I base that on? Having watched a lot of your videos and having responded to a lot of your videos and having been right every time that you are going to say a bunch of stupid, irresponsible, demonstrably incorrect disinformation. You have a perfect record in that regard.
Listen to other people and see if what I said is right or not. Challenge me with information that seems...
I have, Gil, repeatedly. To no avail. You keep making the same videos saying the same stupid shit again. If you don't mind being challenged, I'm challenging you, Gil. Come and front me for a debate about science, sunshine. Come and tell me all about how you're an expert in science and how you know all about saturated fat and all about cholesterol, even though you're not a cardiovascular pathophysiologist. One of the things that I am, Gil.
Contradictory. I think those are all good mindsets, as long as we're all in a headspace of healthy skepticism and kind of, I think, building our confidence gradually as more and more reliable information points in a consistent direction.
But there isn't any that points in any direction with regard to hard health outcomes in human beings as it relates to any aspect of human nutrition whatsoever. It does not exist. We have to be honest. We have to accurately assess the state of information or disinformation such that it is, Gil.
That's how I would sum it up.
So I think the question is, how do we cultivate this mindset of skepticism so we don't fall for the first thing we see or the first thing we want to believe, right? But at the same time, stay open-minded so we don't start thinking that we already know everything.
Are we done with Brad, by the way? He had very little input, which is, indicated and right because he really has very little to say on this topic. Wow.
And we stop learning. How do we strike that balance? I think about this all the time. So I'll leave you 3 things that I try to do consistently, and you let me know other things that you do or that you think I...
Yeah, I actually apply common sense and scientific discipline to the way in which I communicate about what evidence does and does not exist in the scientific record, Gil. That should be your number 1. And that is underpinned in the first instance by coming from a place of competence, wisdom, and experience in the field, which you clearly, sadly, have a destitution on all of those regards, every one of them.
I should do. I'm all ears. Number 1, I never stop reading science.
Science about what? Where is the science that we should read about human nutrition, Gil?
I spend several hours every day going over studies, new studies, older studies.
How is it then that you're still so absolutely, utterly incapable of analysing a study competently, Gil? It's almost as if just reading things doesn't actually give you the skills you need to be able to read them critically.
And we never release a video on a topic before we've gone over dozens, sometimes hundreds of studies on that topic.
How do you then still get it so badly wrong every single time, Gil? How do you still misguide the public so vastly, so desperately, every single time you make a video? Please explain.
Make sure that what we're saying, the message that we're conveying to you, reflects the totality of the evidence.
Right. So why are you making videos about human nutrition then, Gil? Because the totality of the evidence is none. Everything that you say when you open your mouth out about nutrition is your opinion. The difference between one opinion and another is the level of veracity of the person who is espousing the opinion. Of the 2 of us, Gil, one of us has some credibility in nutrition science and pathophysiology and research design and statistical inference and actually having a decent publication record as a scientist. And the other one's you.
Also, I have a personal rule. I've talked about this in previous videos. Anybody who disagrees with anything I say on social media and presents some peer-reviewed evidence, if I'm not...
Well, hang on a minute. Peer-reviewed is one thing. Evidence is another. Peer-reviewed means that 2 people who are usually friends of the editor of the journal concerned have read through a paper, usually in the last day or 2, over about 10 minutes, maybe before their time frame is up and they have to return it back and say yes or no, and they say, yes, publish this or don't. That's what peer review is. Evidence, on the other hand, is properly conceived, properly designed, properly powered, properly tenured, properly randomized, observed empirical interventional studies under control. That's what evidence is when you're talking about cause and effect. They're not the same thing, Gil. There's a bunch of stuff that's peer-reviewed that's not remotely evidence, like epidemiology. All of it. Okay? You're conflating things, son. It's a big mistake.
Familiar already with what they're showing, I have to read that study. I leave a tab open on the browser, and sooner or later, I go through it, and I integrate it into my notes and, the general.
You mean you read the conclusion statement made by the authors of that study and you believe them and you put that in your notes. These authors said that, therefore it's correct. It must be correct because it's peer-reviewed. And that's it. That's the level of your engagement with the literature, Gil. I've peer-reviewed more articles than you've probably had hot feeds in your life, son. What do you think about peer review now? Okay, what's next?
Picture of that field. Non-negotiable personal rule. Number 2, I make sure that I'm not just reading aimlessly, but I'm actually forcing myself to look at the big picture.
What big picture? That's just a buzz term, Gil. That doesn't mean anything. Scientific studies, those which are actually evidence, are by their very nature and definition, therefore reductionist, focused. They inform on a given, clearly stated, unambiguous hypothesis, yes or no. Big picture.
Because you can read endless studies in a pocket of evidence and still miss 90% of the picture, and that's not helpful.
More than 90%, Gil, you've missed the picture entirely. You're looking the other direction, informed only by your pre-existing bias and your adherence to the Church of Anorexia Vegana. Incredible.
Right? So that means things like meta-analyses, systematic reviews.
Of what? Meta-analyses of what, Gil? Because a meta-analysis of a bunch of bags of dog shit, all that gives you is a bigger pile of dog shit. Meta-analysis doesn't make your evidence stronger if your underpinning studies in your meta-analysis are dog shit. An empiricist knows that.
Things that are broad overviews of a field that force me to look at the full landscape. And
Again, full landscape, a buzz term. No, evidential studies in science are absolutely focused. They are reductionist. That's how it's done.
3, I try to stay receptive to feedback.
No, you don't, Gil, because I've given you feedback, I don't know how many times over the last few years. Not a peep, no response, not a word from you, Gil. Come and front me, sunshine. I'll give you some feedback, like I have done today.
Feedback from colleagues, for example, who watch the videos or who I discuss these topics with. I know there's a number of our
so feedback from people who agree with you inherently. Okay, good.
These who watch our videos and who give me feedback as well, and feedback from the viewers. Comments.
Yeah, I've given you plenty over the years, Gil, and I've made a number of videos about it, which people might take that odyssey of discovery to find online somewhere. Search for me by name on the search engine of your choice. It'll come up.
People who reach out. The channel is getting a little bigger. I don't necessarily catch every comment that comes in, but I try to keep a finger on the pulse. I'll give you a concrete example. Last week, we published a video on Lp(a), this lipoprotein. And the majority of the experts I've talked to, people who study Lp(a), say that the blood levels are stable throughout life, that they don't change that much. And yet, several people contacted me after the video came out and said, I've lowered my levels a lot using this diet or that diet. So I'm completely open to that being possible. The science so far hasn't demonstrated it, but that doesn't mean it can't happen in some contexts. I hope it's true, and I hope future research...
Why? Lipoprotein A is not causally related to any deleterious outcome either, Gil. Why would you want to lower it? Its expression, its concentration in the human body, is under the tight control of the genes. Those genes having survived 13.8 billion years of evolution at least. Why would you want to intervene? Why would you think that you know better than the genes that have their wisdom over that period of time when your complete lack of wisdom or humility or understanding of your own level of incompetence does not understand that?
Research establishes it, and if it does, I'll be thrilled to come on and report it. Today was a bit of an unusual video, less on the nitty-gritty and the bar graphs, and a bit more of a reflection maybe, an attempt to step back and make sure that we're heading in the right direction.
You're not, Gil. You're promoting a plant-based diet to people. That is the wrong direction. That is 180 degrees out of phase with what you should be doing if you want to lead people to a lifestyle that is, I'm loath to use the word likely, the one that's in line with our genetic past, the one that's in line with the way our bodies are designed by natural selection pressures, the one that is anecdotally connected with vast health improvements, basically almost invariably. The carnivore diet is the appropriate diet for a human being, apparently. And you're suggesting something that's 180 degrees out of phase with that. You're going the wrong way.
But we do have a video in the pipeline on saturated fat going.
Oh, God. Stick around the channel, boys and girls. I'll be dealing with that whenever it comes out too, I suspect, because you'll get it wrong again.
Over all of the frequently asked questions with a really exciting guest that we just booked. So stay tuned for that. We are going to keep looking.
Can't wait.
Under the hood. In the meantime, here's a general look at saturated fat.
Which I've seen, and it's absolutely, completely ignorant from start to finish, Gil. Not a single thing you've had to say in that video is correct, demonstrable, or factual. It's ideology from start to finish. It's propaganda from start to finish. None of it is scientific at all. None of it is based on any evidence because it does not exist. Still, it is your opinion. And it's about as ignorant as it's possible to be. What's next?
And some of the many controversies that surround it.
There are no controversies.
And here's a look at bias and nutrition.
Bias, you say? Good. That's a topic about which you should be well and truly expert, Gil, given that yours is absolutely clear and patent, as is mine. Only I acknowledge mine, and I give the reasons why I've come to the professional, very educated and very sensible opinion that I have over the years. You mislead people and suggest that you have evidence for your theology when you don't. It is a lie. It's disgraceful, and you really ought to stop it, Gil. Right. Anyway, that's more than enough of Gil for one day. The rest of you, you know the drill. Door, backside, not hitting your backside as you know how it is. Anyway, let's do the music, shall we? 2, 3, 4.